Hello and welcome to Red Mate. Today we're doing the Premier League prediction table. Brand new season about to kick off, so let's get started on who we think is going to finish in which position. First of all, I guess champions prediction here for me. It's hard to go past the same team that have won 4 in a row so far. I think that's probably an easy slot, maybe a cop-out Ants, but at the same time, I don't think anyone's really going to push Man City on that spot. So first of all, I'm going to put them in at top spot, and maybe from there might get a little bit more interesting on who we can pick to go in next. Secondly, I think in terms of consistency over the past few years, as well as potential strengthening of their squad over the summer with just a few signings here and there in terms of like their defense and whatnot, I might have to go Arsenal next. I think they've been quite consistent over the last few years. Arteta's got them playing quite an attractive brand of football, and yeah, I think they're not going to be any worse maybe than last season. If not, they're just going to continue to build with the likes of Rice settling in a little bit more and all the players really coming together. I don't think they've lost any big players either. So yeah, I'm going to go Arsenal next. For me, I guess as a Liverpool fan, I'm always going to be looking at where to put them in. Obviously, a new manager has come in. Klopp's gone, we've got Slot now in charge, and I guess the biggest headline around Liverpool is that they're the only team not to have made any signings at the time of recording. So I think they're quite fortunate in the sense that they've got quite a strong squad. You'd think a new manager coming in, he'd want to bring some players of his own in, whether or not that's players he's worked with before or players that he feels fit the system that he likes to use and guys that he can feel he can get the most out of. He's obviously got a little bit more in terms of spending at Liverpool than he's had at previous clubs. So you'd think that he'd bring in a few players, and obviously been rumoured with a couple that have kind of fallen through as well. So pre-season they've looked kind of strong. It is a similar brand of attacking football as to what Klopp played. Maybe ambitious to put Liverpool in third. I might sneak them into fourth just as a little bit of optimism. Normally I have someone else here with me, kind of getting in my ear, trying to remove some bias, but I'm going to put Liverpool in third place and we'll try to sneak someone in between, potentially. I'm looking at the other teams there. It's interesting that, Aston Villa finished top 4 last season. They've got to step up now and play some Champions League this season. Obviously very good, but the year before we saw Newcastle do the same thing in terms of sneaking up into, Champions League position, and unfortunately they've not able to retain that and keep that momentum going. It almost seems like once you kind of break into that, it's very hard to maintain because of the additional wearing that kind of takes its toll on you, playing the extra competitions, the high level of football, the depth of squad you need. And even, about 10 years ago now, we saw Leicester do it as well, where they won the league, qualified for Champions League, and it is very hard to have a strong league run again and finish quite well in the Premier League, as well as doing well in the Champions League and progressing through that competition. Obviously the big hitters here, we're looking at Chelsea, United, Tottenham as well, typical, and then of late we're looking at Newcastle and maybe Aston Villa surrounding it. Will anyone else break into that kind of area? Brighton have obviously played quite attractive football of late. Brentford always do okay. Personally, what I'm gonna say, I'm gonna go Liverpool third, and I'm gonna put United in fourth. I think they've given Ten Hag a new deal. It was a little bit of a surprise, but I think he won the FA Cup last minute there, and potentially that's bought him a little bit more time. It'll be interesting to see how he goes again this year. They've made a couple of signings again, whether or not that will strengthen up their team. They had a very leaky defense last season, conceding a lot of chances, facing a lot of shots. I think potentially they can do well, and again, trying to remove all bias. I don't think they're a standout team, but again, you're looking at Tottenham, Chelsea. It's really hard to judge these days with the amount of transfers that, say, Chelsea are making, a brand new team in and out. I might go Chelsea in the next spot of fifth. I think they've got a pretty good squad, Cole Palmer and all these other guys in and around that team. They've got enough to do well, but it just seems like they can't put a consistent run of games together. I think they finished the season quite strong at the end of last year, but again, they've already made a few signings and we just do not know what's going to happen with that club. They've got a new manager as well, so classic Chelsea. It's always short-term success. It either works or it doesn't. It'll be on to the next, and historically that has tended to work. Over the last few years, it's really been up and down. So I'm thinking maybe a fifth there. Again, I'm not the most confident on this because I think there's still, obviously with the transfer window still open, we could see teams strengthen just a little bit more. or potentially if there's some big name exits, who knows. But I'm just going to have to go with what I think in this moment. Next, I'm going to put in Tottenham. I think they've, made, if we can even see that, we know we've got the Tottenham crest there, which is very dark on the black background. Not ideal, but yeah, I've got Tottenham there in 6th. I guess the biggest headline for them is signing Solanke, brand new striker. They lost Kane last season, and it's quite hard to replace someone who's been there for so long, who's been so consistent, scoring so many goals, but they must feel that he's the man to do it, and they could easily finish higher. Some of these teams, maybe I'm kind of going off historical form, but Ange's just had an extra year as well with the team since this time last year, so potentially they're learning the system, they're settling into it, they might be able to step up and go that little bit further. But just based on the squad and maybe how they've kind of done it the last few seasons, I'm going to put them in 6th. 7th spot here, like I said, a lot of few teams have done well. I think Aston Villa would have to be next. It might be harsh to not put them higher given how well they did last season, but like I mentioned, they're facing Champions League competition and it takes a lot out of them, comparing them to Newcastle as well last season. It's hard to just keep going, and you got to find greater depth in squad, keep going at that higher level as well. So I think they're good enough to finish higher, but whether or not those number of variables there will lead them to finish about 7th, I think that's fair for them. Next on the agenda, I'm going to put in the 8th to 12th positions, just based on how they've been playing and what I like to see from them. I'm going to put in Crystal Palace. I think they've made some decent signings. I think they always tend to do really well. I like how they play. They have lost Elise, but if they manage to keep a few of their other star players, they always seem to be an exciting team to watch, bit of individual flair and good club to get behind. So I think they can do quite well. Behind them, I'm going to go with Brighton. I've touched on them just briefly before. They're always quite strong and they can definitely beat some of the bigger teams with how they play. And yeah, wouldn't be surprised if they do a little bit better, but at the same time, a lot of the top teams are always improving. It's going to be hard for them to really get too much higher, but hopefully, we can see them do well. I think Newcastle will be next. I think again, they seem to have a lot of things going for them, but not enough to be consistent enough all the time. I think individually they've got some players. I like Isak. We saw rumours of Gordon leaving and a few other players. They've had a lot of things going on behind the scenes with financial fair play and having to sell players to, meet certain metrics and whatnot to make sure they don't get in too much trouble. But sometimes you can see things like that take a bit of a toll and affect the players on the pitch. And yeah, although when we see them play at times, they can just go out one day and score plenty of goals and play really free-flowing football. Other times they'll just lose games and it feels like they've just kind of run out of steam. And I'm not too sure if that was maybe last season a bit more of an injury crisis or whatnot. Maybe it's what I mentioned, playing the Champions League, but I think they will finish around, that 11th spot. I mean, as we start to get into that mid-table area, obviously I'm not feeling maybe as strongly about these positions and that they might be somewhat a bit more interchangeable. But at least within this category, I think Newcastle will sit there kind of just missing out on the Europa League spots, and kind of their competition for the season will be these other teams. The next one I'm going to put in there will be Brentford. I think, strangely enough, seem to have kept Ivan Toney, who has been a massive name over the past few years with all the stuff that's happened off the pitch, him getting into the England squad and whatnot, and then being quite vocal about a transfer that hasn't quite happened yet at the time of recording, maybe not, but rumours haven't really been too loud in terms of that either, which is a bit surprising to me, to be honest. But yeah, I think they can do quite well. They always play really good football. I think they're going to finish within those few spots there. The last team I'm going to put in there, and maybe it's based on historical play, but also maybe the strengthening that they've done this season, is West Ham. I think they've made a few signings, showing some real intent in terms of where they want to be and really push on forward. A few changes around the club with personnel and whatnot, so both players and manager and things. So I think that they're going to do a bit better this season. They've made a number of signings. They've been rumoured with a lot of big names. Not all of them have gone through, but they've already made a few that I think can really spur them on to do a bit better this season than historically or of recent. So putting West Ham in that bracket. So yeah, going into that lower mid-table, which might seem like a bit of a non-event in there, but at the same time, these are the the teams now who I think will be escaping relegation. When I start to look at these kind of areas of the Premier League, I don't want to be just chucking in the new teams that have just come up and expecting them to go back down. It feels like a bit of a cop-out, although noting that it is what happened last season. But at the same time, for me, I think it feels a little bit, I guess it's not the greatest feeling that you think, this team's kind of got that fairy tale where they've been promoted up to the Premier League. And you kind of hope that they can somewhat sustain it for a couple of years. And, that's why we kind of love that football pyramid of the teams, promotion, relegation, and balancing each other out. But it does feel at the same time that the teams towards the top of the Premier League are just getting further and further away. And the top to the bottom of the Premier League is getting bigger and bigger too. So unfortunately last season we saw the three that come up go straight back down. And again, the smaller teams maybe who have done well to actually get into the Premier League, it will always feel like a bit of a challenge to keep themselves there. Some of the historical bigger clubs might have a bit more resources, fan base, other facilities that might help them do well behind the scenes in terms of retaining their place in the Premier League. But just looking at the football side, next on the league positions here, I'm going to go for Bournemouth. And again, on the flip side of Tottenham, I guess the big news for them, losing Dominic Solanke, who scores plenty of goals for them, is always their number 9 lead scorer. Whether or not they can get someone to replace him and match those number of goals and really kick the club on to go on to that next step and retain their kind of momentum that they seem to have, it will be the big question there. So let's see how Bournemouth go. I think they'll be about there. Next, I'm going to say, based on how they did in the Championship and whatnot, I'm going to go for Leicester next. I think that they've obviously been in the Premier League before. A lot of their players have got Premier League experience. They managed to retain a few of them when they went down, and obviously coming back up again, I think they can do quite well. They invested quite heavily into the training ground and other facilities around the place, so I think they will be able to somewhat keep up with the Premier League to some degree, with the stadium and things like that. And if they can keep that attractive brand of football going, that you do need to adjust again when you come back up and you're playing some of those really elite teams towards the top. But I think they've got enough to kind of at least stay in the Premier League this season. I wouldn't be expecting them to go straight back down just based on, the Premier League know-how that they've got. So I'm going to put them in there. Next for me, I'm going to put in Wolves. I thought last season they actually played some really attractive football. A lot of games, at least towards the start of the season, I thought they were unlucky not to get more points. Again, you just see some of those teams that they're just missing a very small thing which might stop them from winning a game, and they end up just getting a draw because they concede late, or they get a draw and they maybe should have won and capitalised on their chances. They've got a few individual players there that I think can win them games, and I did enjoy watching them play last season, although they have lost Neto to Chelsea, which is another big name transfer that's gone down, but I think they've got enough to keep them around in the Premier League here this season. Next, again, for me, I'm going to go with Everton. I think that they'll do enough to stay up. I think they could have done a lot better last season, but they were facing the point deduction, which probably made their overall position look a little bit worse than what it actually was. I think they ended up with 6 or 7 points deduction last season, which had they got, I think would have looked a lot better on paper in terms of how they went and the performances. So I think that probably snuck under the radar, maybe how well they actually did last season, especially given the last 2 years they were fighting relegation all the way down to the last week or so. I guess we're looking now at the last spot in terms of who's going to stay up out of all these teams. And for me, I'm thinking that the team that will stay up out of these 4, Forest is always kind of battling there and whatnot, but I think it might actually be Fulham. I think they've always got a decent squad. They play quite nice. They do have a lot of players that seem to be coming and going each season, but they do have a pretty strong core, and again, just a lot of years in the Premier League over the last number of decades. And I think that compared to maybe some of these clubs that have come up, I am left with 2 out of the 3 that came up to go back down. I think Forest have been dodging relegation a little bit over the last few years. I mentioned Everton doing it, Bournemouth maybe as well, but I think those guys might just be a little bit safer than these teams. And I remember even 2 years ago, Southampton, when they were still in the Premier League, they were quite poor. And to go down and back up, I mean, Leicester have done it as well, but I think Southampton maybe don't quite have as much strength as Leicester do in terms of squad, and whenever players or whenever clubs kind of do that whole overhaul of players, thinking that they need to really strengthen to stay up, they need a brand new squad. Sometimes it can almost be at your detriment as well, because there's so many new faces and things that it gets quite hard to kind of deal with. So yeah, last but not least, I'm going to put Forest in. I think they might just be caught by the drop. Southampton, I'm going to put in 19th, and then Ipswich at 20th. Now, it always feels a bit rough putting in those teams saying that they'll get relegated, but just personally, I prefer to look at it that I think all these other teams are a little bit better. I've started from top to bottom, and then they're kind of the remaining three. Some of these guys might move around a little bit. They are kind of in these categories, so somewhat interchangeable within there, but at the same time, there are a few more weeks left in the transfer market. So sometimes just a player or two addition into the club, or maybe if some are out the door, it can really affect the club. Certainly mentality from the other players in terms of the club's ambitions and where they think the club will go, or even just that one guy who's going to walk through the door who really encourages everyone else to, wow, okay, this is where we're at. We mean business this season. Whatever it is, I think that can really make a difference. So yeah, these are my Premier League predictions. Let me know what you guys think, if any clubs should be doing better, should be doing worse. Chuck it in the comments below. I've been Ant, this has been Red Mate. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.